Hey everybody, it's Taki117 here with Kerbal Space Program. So, I've just updated to Kerbal Space Program version 1.2. And with that upgrade, I've decided to do something a little different. This is going to be a tutorial series with only one mod, and that mod is MechJeb. The reason I'm using MechJeb is because it provides a wealth of information for rocket building as well as planetary transfers, maneuver nodes, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we're going to be talking about as we go through career mode. So, in order to start a new game, you hit Start Game, and then Start New. Now, this brings up a Start New Game dialog box, and we can name it whatever we want. So this is going to be Taki's tutorial series. And I'm going to pick my own custom flag that I've made. And by made, I mean I did a Google image search and found it on the internet. Dropped it into the squad folder in the Kerbal Space Program install. And there's my flag, and I'm going to change the difficulty a little bit. I'm not going to be able to revert flights. Any Kerbals that die will stay dead, and I will have to have a comm network. So let's talk about the settings. So we can revert flights, we can quick save and quick load, which I want to be able to do that mostly for bugs. This game still is in development, so there are going to be bugs that pop up every now and again. Missing crew respawn. What that means is if a Kerbal dies, after a certain period of time, it will show back up in your roster of Kerbals. We can auto-hire crew members before flight. We can choose to purchase parts as we research them. We can have indestructible facilities, meaning if I crash a rocket into it, it's not going to blow up. We can include stock vessels. Kerbal Space Program comes preloaded with some pre-assembled vessels, and if we want, in career mode, we can include those in our vehicle assembly building list. We can adjust things like re-entry heating, resource abundance, how many funds we start with, how much science we start with, how much reputation we start with, and all of our rewards. We can go over here. Kerbals will get experience. Kerbals will not level up immediately. I'm actually going to check that because I do want them to level up immediately and not when they're returned, in case I'm out on another planet and my Kerbal does something amazing. I do not want negative funds or science. I don't want pressure limits, G-force limits, or Kerbal G-force limits, simply because it makes the game a little bit harder than I want to play. I do want plasma blackout. That's actually something realistic that goes on as the capsule moves through the atmosphere. The charged plasma around it actually blocks communication. This was a big deal for Apollo 13 because it came in a little shallower and spent a little more time in the atmosphere. So NASA and the guys on the ground really had no idea if they had survived re-entry until after the parachutes had deployed and they got their communications back. I do want the extra ground stations so that I can have communication all over the planet Kerbin. We're going to accept that, and we're going to go ahead and start. Now, you start off in career mode with very basic buildings. There's not a whole lot to them. So here you have this very useful pop-up window here. It tells you to right-click over space-centered facilities to view more about them, and left-click when you're ready to go inside. So I have several thousand hours into this game. So a lot of these pop-ups I'm going to be clicking through fairly quickly, but you should really take a look at them if this is your first time playing. So here's the Kerbal Space Center in all its wonderful low-tech glory. You have the runway, spaceplane hangar, mission control, vehicle assembly building, tracking station, research and development center, astronaut complex, the administration building, and the launch pad way over here. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to head into mission control where we can accept some contracts. So, first thing we're going to do is gather scientific data from Kerbin and launch our first vessel. Now, you can read these, there's not a whole lot to them. The important parts that we're looking for are the objectives. So our objective is to launch our first vessel off the launch pad or runway to achieve this goal. And then it tells us what we're going to get. It says, for completion we get 3,200 funds, 1 science, and 1 reputation, with an advance of a little over 1,100 funds. So we're just going to go ahead and accept that. Because we accepted the other contract, which gives us an advance of a little over 2,200 funds, we now have a grand total of just under 30,000 funds to play with. So we're going to leave that facility and we're going to head into the vehicle assembly building. Now, I will eventually go over everything in here, but for right now, I'm only going to talk about the things I'm going to actually use. So again, you have Werner von Kerman here, telling you a little bit about the vehicle assembly building, and again, I'm just going to click through that. It's a good read if you've never played before, but if you're someone like me, it's kind of boring. So, we need a place to put a Kerbal. That'd be a command pod. Now, you can see this window here, this is part of the MechJeb mod, and it's a Delta V readout. Delta V tells you how much you can change your orbit by. It is ultimately dictated by Tsiolkovsky's rocket equation, which is a fairly simple equation. It is the exhaust velocity times the gravitational constant times the natural log of your, I'm going to screw this up, but I believe it's your empty mass over your full mass. I could be wrong. It could be full over empty. You can look it up. It's the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation. If you Google rocket equation, it'll pop right up in Wikipedia. So, for every pod, you need a parachute. So, now, these are the different categories. You have things like fuel tanks, engines, couplers, payloads, wheels. Here's the parachute, and that just goes right on top, and if we right click it, we can adjust the minimum pressure required for deployment, and this is based on atmospheric pressure. I like to keep it about 0.5, and the altitude at which it deploys. 1,000 meters is a good, nice round number. We need some sort of engine because we are going to be launching this. And there we go. There is our first rocket. As you can see, it has 773 meters a second of delta V in atmosphere, or 910 meters a second in vacuum. And the reason for that is because as atmospheric pressure decreases, this engine actually becomes more efficient at burning its fuel. You can also see we have a surface launch thrust to weight ratio of 6.81 and a total thrust to weight ratio of 8.02. That's a lot. So if I right click this engine, I can limit my thrust, and as you can see, limiting my thrust changes my thrust to weight ratio. I like to have a surface launch thrust of about 1.5 to 1.2, just so I'm not going too fast in lower atmosphere. If you're seeing re-entry flames or re-entry effects on ascent, you're probably going too fast. You'll also notice that increases my burn time to 50 seconds because I'm not burning as much fuel as fast. Something else I want to fix while we're here is right down here, you'll see these two little icons that represent my parachute and my engine. And this is my staging stack. So, what that means is when I hit the spacebar to stage my rocket, it's going to activate whatever is in the bottom of this stack. So, if I hit my spacebar right now on the launch pad, it would activate both my parachute and my engine, and that's not good. I want to do one and then the other. So I'm going to click the little plus sign here to add another stage. Then I'm going to drag my engine icon into it, so that now, when I press the spacebar on the launch pad, it will just activate my engine. Down here on the left, you can see how much this rocket's going to cost, how many funds we have, as well as our symmetry and our angle snap. These three buttons toggle various icons, the center of mass, the center of thrust, and the aerodynamic overlay, which we'll get into a little more when we start working with aircraft. That's when they really become important. You don't need them so much for rockets, but they can be useful. We'll also get into symmetry and angle snap a little bit later. So for now, let's go ahead and launch this rocket. So we're going to go ahead and hit the launch button, and that will take us out to the launch pad. So, rockets on the launch pad are fairly simple. See, there it is. It's already got a Kerbal in here. This is Jebediah. He's a pilot. So, and you can see the flag that I chose sitting there in the background. Now, this is a solid rocket motor. We don't have to throttle up, but I'm going to, and to do that, I'm going to press Z. Z takes you to full throttle automatically. Alternatively, you can press and hold Shift, but you don't have to. To lower your throttle, you hit Control, and that will bring your throttle down slowly. Or if you want to immediately go to 0 throttle, you hit X. So right now, I'm going to hit Z, and then we're going to turn on our Stability Assistance System, or SAS, with the T key. It's always important to turn this on before launch so that your rocket stays stable. So let's go ahead and launch this rocket. Oh, but first we need to complete our contract by gathering scientific data from Kerbin. So all command pods that have Kerbals on them have an experiment called a crew report. So we're going to right click this. Don't need to worry about hardly any of this really, but we're going to click this button labeled crew report, and that's going to generate a crew report, and we're going to keep that experiment. Now we're going to do something called a ladder dance. It's called that because Jeb here is going to go on EVA onto the ladder. He is going to perform an EVA report. He's going to keep that, and he's going to right click. He's going to take the data from the pod, the crew report that we've collected, and he's going to store both of his experiments before hitting B and climbing back on board. Now the reason for that is so that pods can only hold one experiment per slot. So, or rather one experiment per biome. There are several different biomes around Kerbin, and we'll get into more of that here in a little bit. As you can see, I can perform another crew report. I don't need to because I already have one. So here we go, we're going to launch this rocket. And there it goes. See? We've launched our first vessel. Now we have not completed this other contract because we haven't recovered any science. So I'm going to perform something called a gravity turn. When my rocket hits about 80 to 100 meters a second, I'm going to slowly pitch over towards the east. Ooh, oh dear. There we go. I forgot to turn on my stability assistance system. Now, the main reason we do this is because in order to get to orbit, you have to build up both horizontal and vertical velocity in sufficient amounts. Yes, you can go straight up and then burn sideways and eventually get to orbit, but it is horribly inefficient to do that. So, and I'm going to go ahead and pull up my orbit info here window in MechJeb. It tells me, you know, my orbital speed, my current apoapsis, some other things. We're beginning to fall, so I'm going to activate my parachute. And that should deploy when we reach about 3,000 meters, or 3 kilometers, in indicated altitude right up here. This is our altimeter. This tells us how high we are from sea level. Now that's important because, you know, if you look over to the west there's all these mountains, and your altimeter is not going to tell you how far you are from the top of those mountains. It's going to tell you how far you are from sea level. So it is a very real possibility if you are flying an aircraft and you're not high enough that you will crash into those mountains, and that's not good. So here's our pod falling. See, it's opening our parachute began opening at 1,000 meters, but it took it until about 500 meters to fully open. That's why leaving it at 1,000 meters is important, because parachutes take time to open. Now, I'm going to speed up time a little bit, and I do this by pressing the period key on my keyboard, and this increases the rate of time. You see my mission clock is ticking away quite nicely here. And here I go. I'm going to hit the ocean just off the shore of the Kerbal Space Center. And now we're going to do another crew report. See, and now we're at Kerbin Shores instead of the launch pad. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that, and we're going to do another ladder dance, where Jeb's going to get out, he's going to do an EVA report, but instead of taking data and putting it back, we're just going to climb back in, and then we're going to hover over here and recover our vessel. Now, this completes both of our contracts, as well as some others. So we have, oh wow, we got 24 science to spend. And we now have 116,000 funds, because we get funds back from recovering parts, as well as for the completion of contracts. And Jeb has gained 1 experience. So, if we look at our messages here, it says we've got scientific data, so we completed that contract. We've completed, gathered scientific data. We've launched our first vessel. But we've also performed some other things. So, we've performed an EVA test, we've launched our first vessel, and we broke some speed and altitude records as well. And these are completed automatically as you progress. So, let's go ahead and go into the Research and Development building, or the R&D facility, and take a look at our tech tree. Now this is a representation of the technological progression. We start out with the very basics, and we can go all the way up to things like, large ore holding tanks, scanners, large probes, radioisotope thermoelectric generators, which use the radioactive decay to generate electricity. Things like that. But we gotta get there first. That's gonna be a while. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna unlock engineering, which gets us some more parts, some antennas, looks like a stack decoupler, and we're also going to unlock more engine parts. Now we still have some science left over, but it's not quite enough. Let's see if I can, nope, not enough science to research. So it's not quite enough to unlock anything from the next tier. But we'll get there. So, now we're going to go into our mission control, and we have a whole bunch more contracts to look at. So, we can escape the atmosphere, that's always a good one. And I like testing parts at the launch site. There's very little I have to do to complete that contract. Now, I can only have a max of 2 contracts. So, now that we've done that, we're going to head back to the vehicle assembly building and build a bigger rocket. So, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a stack decoupler under there and link it to our parachute, so that when we activate this stage, both the decoupler and the parachute are going to activate at the same time. Put our small booster back there, and I'm actually going to lower the thrust just a little bit more, because this is actually going to be an upper stage. We're going to put another stack decoupler there, along with this hammer booster. I'm going to lower its thrust So as you can see, my thrust to weight ratio is about 3.3. I want it to be about 1.1. And there we go, close enough. Because we're gonna put another decoupler on there and another booster. And again, we're going to lower the thrust until we're about 1.15 to 1.2. Yeah, 1.6 works for me. And then we're going to put another decoupler and these structural elements. So now we're going to get into angle snap and the symmetry. So right now angle snap is on, and as you can see, it will snap to about 5-degree increments. Now if I hit the C key, that turns angle snap off, and you can tell it's off because it is round instead of a hexagon. And now it will just slide fairly easily around. I like keeping it on just because I like things to be nice and neat. By pressing the X key, that increases how many things I can apply at once in symmetry. So for 2 times symmetry, let's see if you can see it. Yep, there we go. There's one on either side of the part. 3 times, there's one on 3 sides, and 4 times, which is what I'm going to be using here, there's 4 of them placed around the part. So there we go. Now I'm going to use this move tool, and when you're moving things, you always want to turn off angle snap. I'm going to select a part to move, and it's not only going to move that part, but it's going to move all the other symmetrical parts. I'm going to drag this green arrow down so it looks just like that. And this is more personal preference. You don't have to do this, but I like to. But one of my contracts is to test this flea solid booster at the launch site. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a flea booster. I'm going to press Shift and X to decrease my symmetry. Attach my flea booster, and then I'm going to use the rotate tool to rotate it up, just like that, so that it's kind of out of the way. Rotate a little more. There we go. Now I'm also going to take away both thrust and the solid fuel, because that's going to decrease the cost of my rocket just a little bit. It's always important to save as much money as you can. So as you can see, the total delta V for this rocket is a little less than 2,700 meters a second, or rather a little more than 2,700 meters a second in vacuum, or a little less than 2,400 meters a second in atmosphere. And that's fine. All we're doing is we're going up and we're coming back down. Very similar to the Mercury Redstone missions of the early American space program. So let's go ahead and launch this, and it's going to roll out to the pad. It's going to be set up for us. And pretty sure Jebediah is going to be our pilot again. Yep, there he is. He's our pilot. Nothing phases him. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fix our staging. So as you can see, each coupler and each engine is in its own stage, but I don't necessarily want that. Like, I want my first stage engine to be with that decoupler. I want this engine to be with that decoupler, and there we go. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to activate this engine. And there we go. We've completed our test the engine contract. So now we just have to reach an altitude of 70,000 meters. Again, we're going to throttle up, we're going to turn on our SAS system, and we are going to launch our rocket in 3, 2, 1. And there we go. Oop, that part exploded. Oh well. And there we go. We're lifting off quite nicely into the sky. So, here's where your gravity turn becomes important. I'm going to turn on my orbit information here. And this is why I like having this up, is it tells me what my apoapsis is. Go ahead and start pitching over here. Again, I'm performing a gravity turn, and the reason I'm turning east is because that is the direction of rotation of the planet. So I'm gaining about 100 meters a second or so of extra delta V, or extra velocity, that I can build on top of to get to orbit. Whereas if I went west, I would first have to cancel that velocity before building up and going to orbit. So some good rules of thumb for performing a proper gravity turn is you want to be about 65 degrees by 5 kilometers and 45 degrees by about 10 kilometers. And I'm going to go ahead and drop that engine down as well. Now I'm going to stop at 45 degrees because I'm not trying to get to orbit. In fact, this one might not even break the atmosphere. It might. We'll see. So here we go. Now while I'm burning, I'm going to go ahead and do a crew report while flying over the water. I can't do an EVA report because, well, I'm no longer on the surface. Whoa. Now, that happened because my rocket is very, very light. So it doesn't take a whole lot to cause it to turn. Fortunately, I don't think this rocket is going to make it to orbit. But that's okay. Or rather, I don't think this rocket is going to make it out of the atmosphere. That's okay. It might. I only need to get to 70 kilometers and I'm at 40 already. 44, 45. Ooh, this is going to be close. .57, 58, 59, 60, and it looks like I'm going to be just short. That's okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jettison our stage. That got me a little bit, but not enough to make orbit. So, oh well. We'll just have to try again. So, now, we're going pretty fast. 1100 meters a second is fast. But our pod is equipped with this thing called a heat shield. So, we need to point that in our direction of travel. It's going to be about there by the time we get around. I'm just going to speed up time here, just like I did before. Here we go. Moving right along. Do 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 do. Alright, now we're starting to come back down. I'm actually going to turn off my stability system. Now, this pod is aerodynamically stable in that it really wants to fall retrograde, which is good. That means the heat shield is towards the atmosphere. See if we get some re-entry effects here. Now, you're probably wondering why we're accelerating. Well, yeah, there are the re-entry effects. And the reason we're accelerating is because the atmosphere hasn't gotten thick enough to slow us down, and as you can see, it's now thick enough to slow us down. So here we go, falling through the atmosphere. Now, you'll notice over here on the left side in my staging stack that my parachute is red. That means it's very dangerous to try and deploy it. It's probably going to break. So, fortunately, I have it set up so that it will deploy automatically, which is why the icon itself is blue. See, and now it's safe to deploy. But we haven't reached our pressure and altitude requirements yet, so it's still staying packed in its little capsule there. Speed up time just a little bit more. There we go, falling, and there it goes at right about 4 or 5 kilometers sea level altitude. And then at 1 kilometer, which is coming up right now, it's going to start opening, and it takes it a little bit to open, stopping at about 500 meters. And then from there, I'm going to time warp down. You want to be careful when time warping under parachute, because, at least in previous versions, there was the potential for strange physics to happen, and the parachute could break while you were accelerating. And there we go, we've splashed down. Go ahead and do an EVA, and do an EVA report from the water. I'm also going to take that data and do another crew report also from the water, so I can maximize my science return. And I'm going to recover this vessel. And that's it for this episode. I'm Tahi117, and remember, it's only rocket science.